Yo, good morning, everybody. I'm TJ McClellan, broker of Fitness Realty. We are here for another live video, and hopefully, this one will give you some insight all about cancellations. So, without further ado, let me get my slide presentation. So, all right, we're going to be talking about cancellations. We have had a few cancellations doing business. Either buyers cancel or in a very extreme and rare case, sellers will cancel. So we're going to go over a few topics here. First, we're going to talk about buyer's cancellation. What happens before an offer, if it happens before an offer, before due diligence, financing and appraisals, so on and so forth. So, sorry, I got something in my eye. All right, and like I said, we're touching base on this topic because it does happen, and I haven't really put out any training videos that talk about what happens when you have a buyer cancel or a seller cancel. So that's why we're talking about it today. It will happen to you in your career, and it's happened to me several times. So it just depends. If you have a skittish buyer or you have a buyer that just wasn't fully prepared to purchase a home. And the instance that I had a seller that was almost going to cancel, once I told them the options that they had, then they did not pull the trigger on it because it's costly for sellers to do that. So anyway, all right, we're going to talk about buyer's cancellation. So let's talk about it before the offer. If you haven't sent out an offer, then it's no harm, no foul, right? They just say, hey, I'm not ready to buy a house, and they stop looking. No big deal. If that's a client that you've been working with for a long time, hopefully they come back to you. If they selected somebody else, then hopefully you had a contract in place. If you didn't have either one of those, then maybe they will come back and maybe they won't. So it does happen. We lose clients, not frequently, but it does happen. But if they cancel with you before you even get an offer out there, no big deal. Now, if you're under contract and they want to cancel before the due diligence period, then that's not a big deal either because their earnest money has not gone hard, right? Probably have $1,000 earnest money deposit, as high as 1% and potentially as low as $500. So if they cancel before due diligence, then it's super easy. You only need to fill out the the cancellation of buyer's notice. I said that backwards. Buyer's notice of cancellation of real estate purchase contract. So, and I'll show you that form too, because we're going to talk about the form and how to use it and the benefits of the form that it doesn't have the signatures of the seller on there either. So it's just a notification. But before we talk about the actual form, let's talk about each scenario. So if they cancel before due diligence, no problem. If they're a buyer of yours, I will get them their earnest money deposit back relatively quickly. Sometimes if they put in the earnest money and it was a personal check and they canceled the day after, I have to wait for the check to clear and then cash out a new check, or send out a new check. So it could take some time, but I'll do it as quickly as possible. Now, there are a couple scenarios here that aren't really talked about. We're talking about all of these before instances, and these are only if you've marked those appropriate boxes in the Rep C. And all of you that have watched the video about the Rep C know which boxes I'm talking about. So that would be the is conditioned upon due diligence or is not conditioned upon due diligence, and so on and so forth. If you didn't mark those, then your client is going to be SOL and they're going to lose their earnest money. But if they do it before due diligence, like I said, no problem. If they do it before financing and appraisal deadline, they do have an option to do that as well, but it has to be for financing and appraisal items. I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, but the ideas are coming to me as they come. So if they cancel before due diligence, that could be for any reason or no reason at all. They just wake up one day and say, hey, I don't want this house, or it feels like it's too big, or the payment's terrible, I just can't do it. So before due diligence can be for any reason or no reason at all. before financing and appraisal. It has to be for financing and appraisal items. Financing ones are the easiest ones. Just if your client didn't get the rate that they wanted, or the payment doesn't look like the thing that they want, then you can cancel for financing reasons. If the appraisal comes back low, you can cancel for that as well. I would try for a price adjustment first, but if the sellers are being hard, then just cancel. Now, if you've marked the appropriate box, you could cancel before financing and appraisal and have no harm, no foul. Get your earnest money back. Recently, they changed the rep C to have that little box in there that says split earnest money. So that is earnest money that could go from your buyer to your seller in the event that they cancel for financing or appraisal reasons. Typically, we write 0 in that. We just keep our buyer's money safe. But I have seen it with split earnest money. It's pretty rare, though. All right. After financing and appraisal, there are no more options for you to cancel the contract without losing your earnest money or your client's earnest money. So at each one of these dates, you really need to be firm with your client about what happens. I like to say that earnest money is like pouring concrete. So it just gets harder and harder as it goes along the concrete or along the contract. Meaning, as soon as you go under contract and you give them the earnest money, that's like wet concrete. You can really kind of do things with it. I guess I shouldn't say it completely, because in due diligence we could remove the contract and cancel and get our earnest money back. So I guess it's not like wet concrete. Anyway, just go with me on the analogy. The concrete that you set with earnest money will get harder as you go through the contract. So at due diligence, now it firms up a little bit because now you only have financing and appraisal options. And at financing and appraisal, now it's very firm, and you don't have any options after financing and appraisal to cancel the contract without loss of the earnest money. I take that back. There are a few exceptions, and I'll show you those exceptions, but it's going to be really rare for you to see those exceptions. Just tell your clients that it firms up at each one of those deadlines, and after financing and appraisal, it's very, very firm. All right, breaching of the contract. Your buyer could cancel the contract at any time, regardless of those dates, and that is in the breach of the contract if it's after all those deadlines, right? So I guess I said that improperly. Your client could breach the contract and lose their earnest money. That's what I'm trying to get across. All right, let's talk about seller's cancellation, and then we'll go into the forms. So seller's cancellation is much, much more difficult. They don't have the options that buyers have, and it's easier for me to show you that and illustrate that on the forms. So without talking about seller cancellation, let's look at the forms. All right, so let's talk about the buyer's notice of cancellation first. See, buyer's notice of cancellation of real estate purchase contract. You're going to put your buyer in, buyer's brokerage, seller's brokerage, property address. If you're going to do it before due diligence deadline, mark this appropriate box. This is by far the easiest, and due diligence gives us that big golden bubble that I always talk about. I've talked about it with clients before. I've talked about it with team members. So this next box is for cancellation of the Rep C after due diligence deadline, but prior to financing and appraisal deadline. Remember that you also need to check that box to make sure that there's no split costs for your earnest money. So just make sure and be aware that if you're telling your clients, hey, we're going to cancel and you're going to get all your earnest money back, but that box was selected differently, they might not get all their money back. So you really need to be cautious about that, because you're probably going to eat that cost if you tell them improperly, just to save face and save a relationship. If you want to, you don't have to, but when you're wrong and like that, then you just have to pony up the money. All right, and then finally down here, these are the kind of exceptions that I was going to talk about. One of them that is super rare. So the financing condition, after the financing and appraisal deadline, they do have this to cancel upon, but you're still going to lose your earnest money, or you're going to have split cost. Risk of loss is something that is in the REPC in section 20.2, and it talks about a 10% loss in the home in value due to a fire or vandalism or a few different factors like that. And this actually is on both forms. So risk of loss doesn't make it so that either party have to cancel the contract. It just makes it so that either party could cancel the contract. And then in 20.2, I believe it talks about the earnest money. I'd have to look into that more, but the times that you'll see this, or if you see this in your career, we'll walk through it together. I have not had the experience to go through a risk of loss period in a house, so I don't have any experience with that. Subject to sale of buyer's property addendum, there are lines in this that talk about cancellation. The FHA VA loan addendum, we all know the government really protects the FHA borrowers and VA borrowers, so there are verbiage in the addendum that allows a person to cancel the REPC in addition to all the things we've talked about. Same thing with secondary backup contract addendum, same thing with short sale addendum. I'm not sure what this other would be if you were writing it in there, maybe notice of cancellation, then write other, like we don't want the house or something, right? But that's pretty much breaching the contract anyways, because you know you're not going to purchase the home. You're going to lose your earnest money. All right, let's move on to the seller's notice of cancellation. So this is the interesting form, and it just doesn't give very many options. So you need to really tell your sellers that once they've got locked up into a contract, they're pretty much locked in. I mean, they need to just buckle down and get ready for the ride. The only options that sellers have to cancel the contract are on the short sale addendum, the financing condition, the seller's financing or seller financing addendum, which would be the seller carrying the note for the person that's buying the home, which I don't have a lot of experience with seller financing. It's just so uncommon because most people don't own the house outright and then they don't sell it to anybody for seller financing. So anyway, if we go down that road, we'll work it together. And here is that risk of loss, same portion that we just talked about. So the interesting part here is your seller does not have due diligence. They do not have that financing and appraisal deadline. I mean, they have those deadlines, but they don't have the same protection. So if your clients are going to accept a contract, be very, very sure that they are willing to accept what may come with that contract. Case in point, let's say you have a buyer that comes in and their contract says they're going to be a $5,000 earnest money deposit. And your sellers go 2-3 weeks in with this contract and then they're like, whoa, we lost the job in Texas, so we're not moving. We are going to cancel this contract. If your seller wants to cancel the contract, they are giving away the earnest money that the buyers were potentially going to give them if the buyer's breached, and the seller will have to match that earnest money to pay for liquidated damages with that buyer. So $5,000. So this is where if you get a big earnest money deposit in there, it kind of fuels or keeps everybody's feet in the fire. But at the same time, you need to be aware that large earnest money deposits can really bite your sellers in the butt if they are ready to cancel the contract for a reason and that maybe they don't have the money to pay that earnest money. So really be aware of that. Make sure you're coaching your clients in the proper way and make sure that you're telling them at each option and each junction of each contract exactly where they're at, what options they have, and everything like that. All right, so there it is. We talked about cancellation. We talked about buyer's cancellation. We talked about seller's cancellation. Some last thoughts. It does hurt when you have a buyer cancel. It's going to hurt every time that you have a client that cancels a contract. it's just part of doing business. So get ready to have clients do that sometimes, right? It does happen. Get ready for the kind of pain that it creates in you, and just make sure that you're ready for that, because if you were banking on that money to when they closed, be cautious about that, because if it doesn't happen, then you're going to be very angry. You have the potential to ruin a relationship with a client. So just be cautious about that. When you do have to cancel, I guess I didn't really touch on this too well, but when you do have to cancel, you can see these contracts do not have the other party's signature on there. And that's so that you can just sign this and send it to the seller's agent or the seller if they're representing themselves. And that's it. That's all you need to cancel the contract. You don't need anything further than that. Let me check this seller one just to make sure. Yeah, same thing. Only the seller's signature's on here. They do give you a little tidbit about what's happening with the earnest money, but that's about it. So then have a conversation with the agent. Just let them know, hey, it's just business. Our client's canceling. They found that they just don't want the home or whatever. All right. This has been another video by TJ McClelland. I'm the broker of Fitness Realty. If you could like, share, comment, subscribe to our channel, that'd be awesome. We're helping more people learn about real estate and gain a little bit more expertise and knowledge. So thank you guys. And as always, appreciate it. And we'll see you later.